Macro went through really probably 2 or 3 pivots to get to where we ended up. And I mean, pivoting is probably the hardest thing to do in a startup because it's in the mittens of what you've been doing today isn't working. And then it's like a realization that now you have to figure out something else. Now you have this entire team that's working towards something that maybe you don't believe is what the right thing is anymore. And it's when do you tell them at what point, is it when you have a new direction or not?
In today's interview, I talked to Ankith Harathi and John Keck about co-founder relationships, pivoting to find product market fit, and getting acquired. And since they're also investors, we talk about the ins and outs of angel investing. My name is Martina. Join me on my mission to increase representation of underrepresented founders by sharing what I learned and by interviewing investors who share their advice and founders who share their journey. Hi everyone, you are all in for a treat today. I'm speaking with Ankith Harathi and John Keck, who are both founders and angel investors, so it's a twofer. They're the co-founders of Macro, which is a super-powered, customizable interface for Zoom that blew up when we all shifted to working from home in 2020. They've raised over $4 million in funding. They got acquired by in March 2021. And now they're also investors in over 30 companies. Ankith was previously the head of growth at GamerSensei, which is the world's premier esports coaching platform. And John was an early engineer at DoorDash, which obviously requires no intro. So welcome both. I'm so excited to have you all.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Cool, so we're gonna dive right in. I would love to just kind of hear a bit about you two.
Yeah, I could start. Let's see, fun things about us. We're both mechanical engineers and subsequently did that for about a year and then decided that we wanted to go into tech instead. I went to Purdue, born and raised in Indiana, and have kind of always had a love for engineering and knew that I wanted to build things. And went first into a job in med devices, realized that I didn't want to be in that space or in mechanical engineering at all after 4 years of school. And jumped into my role at DoorDash, where I was actually launching a bunch of new markets at the beginning, and then kind of transitioning into seeing an opportunity for internal tools and how much software could help the teams actually continue to scale the company. So did a bunch of things around sales analytics and really got excited about how can you help people in their day-to-day jobs with software. And so that's kind of the quick intro of what got me into tech, at least.
Yeah, so like John said, also mechanical engineer, went to Cornell and was also super heavily involved in like everything mechanical engineering related. I think both John and I are huge gearheads. So like grew up on motorcycles and I was on Cornell's Formula racing team. But then when I started out my career as an engineer, just really didn't find that same spark of joy that I had when I was doing things for fun. So then when the opportunity presented itself to join an esports startup, I'd also been a big gamer, took that opportunity, and that was my first kind of foray into startups and learning about what a startup even was, how it was so different than operating at a big company, and absolutely loved it. And their head of growth was a new role to me, but at least, and I think it also means very different things to different companies. But at GamerSensei, it was kind of managing both our product process, product development, but also sales, customer support, partnerships, basically anything to help us grow from like pre-seed to our Series A, which is the time that I left the company. And then we, at basically the same time, John and I both went to Harvard to do our MSMBA, which was actually at the time a brand new program that was geared towards technical founders that wanted to come to business school, potentially meet co-founders, develop their technical and business expertise, though I don't know how much actual classroom education happens in business school. And that's where we met and founded Macro like a couple months after.
First of all, strong plug for business school there.
It has value, but in outside of the classroom ways, and even the classroom were great, but there's a ton of value. I mean, I think the one-liners, nothing of Macro would have been possible without going to business school.
That's amazing. So how did you all find each other then?
Basically day one of class. So it was very, very, opportunistic, I guess. We started a little bit early because we were in that dual degree program, and everybody kind of started like coupling up a bit because a lot of these people wanted to start companies while they were at school. And, we had actually been brought together by a third person who wanted to do some wacky idea about address changing or something, because of course there's a lot of these business school problems that everybody wants to solve. Changing your address and getting all that updated and all the, subsequent websites is a big problem. And so we started working on that, realized, this isn't something we want to continue to work on idea-wise, but we really liked working together. So the two of us actually just went off and started hacking on things.
So first impressions of each other, John, when you saw Ankith, what did you feel? You were just like, this is the one?
Yeah, I mean, jealous of the hair. Obviously, he's hiding it with the hat, but as you can tell, my hair just doesn't compete with Ankith's hair. No, I think there were really the first impressions were who's serious here. I think there's a lot of people that take those 2 years as let's just have some fun and go on cool vacations and relive college. And I think there were other people who were like, hey, I'm actually here because I want to find somebody to work on something with and actually build something exciting. And so that was the first thing I noticed with Ankith. Like he's very focused, very serious, and knew that, hey, I'm not hedging with any other things. I want to do this. And so that was really, really great to see at the beginning, and then quickly learned how loyal he was and how willing he was to really just put in as much work as we needed to have success.
Well, you can't see John right now, but John is super buff, and that was this is the buffest dude in class right now. So no, I'm just kidding. Oh, that actually, no, all of it's true, but that's not the reason. So I think that the first impression, so John is actually a true builder. I think when we were brought together for the Addressably project, it was never an idea that we're oh yeah, this we're gonna go all in on this idea. But we were able to stand up quick prototypes, quick websites, and it's I've never worked with someone like John who actually would just be able to get something done that quickly before. And yeah, all of us in the program are technical, but there's varying degrees of what that actually means. And I think there's a different type of technical, if you've worked at a big company before versus you can stand up stuff 0 to 1 in hours and minutes as opposed to weeks and weeks of work. So just being able to build something, like John said, the actual desire to found something. In business school, there's a lot of, I think one of our professors called it wantrepreneurs, of people who will say that they want to be a founder or want to be an entrepreneur. And they'll go through all the motions, but when it comes time to do consulting recruiting for summer internships, you see them also applying to all the jobs and doing the case study method. And you're well, if you're running this company, what are you actually doing? And I think for us, as soon as we had an inkling of an idea, even during school in that first semester, we were basically working on that pretty much full time. Class was also very much a secondary priority. And I think that the commitment, the hard work, and just wanting to do something and doing everything that we could in our power to make it happen was something a lot of our classmates didn't have and wanted to explore other things. And I think that we kind of just stuck it out, and it ended up working out.
That's really amazing. A really beautiful first meeting story. So, what makes the two of your partnership work then?
That's a good question. So when John and I argue, I mean, we frequently argue, but they're very civilized discussions. But one of the most common things that happens is we'll both have differing point. We're going to start at opposite ends of the spectrum. By the end of the argument, we've usually switched completely. And so it's not even that we've decided on something. John will now take whatever I was saying at the beginning, and I'll now be taking whatever John was saying at the beginning. And I think that's actually really unique because, kind of the whole point of business school is to learn from someone else and listen to their point of view and their opinions. And I think that we kind of take that to the extreme, which is we actually then adopt the other person's point of view and hold it as our own and switch. And I think I will be the first to tell you I'm a very stubborn person, and I think that to be debating and working and arguing with someone like John and us having that dynamic, I think it helped in so many moments because when you go through the founder journey, it is you might only see the peaks and the tops of the roller coaster, but there are very, very deep valleys, and it is actually the highs are high but the lows are very low, and there are moments where you want to give up, where you want to quit, where nothing's working out, and in those moments you have the toughest, most stressful, tense conversations. And I think we were able to have those and be super honest with each other and not feel we need to cater to some sort of expectation of what we should be saying, but really what we were actually feeling. And I think that at least for me, was like unique in like a business and professional and even friendship relationship.
The only thing I would add, I think that's spot on. The only thing I would add is like trust. I think there's the reason that we could have those conversations was because we just had a complete trust in each other. And so we knew that regardless of what somebody was trying to pitch or like what side of the argument they were taking, they were genuinely doing it in bettering the company rather than like trying to have, I don't know, their priority optimized, like preferred or whatever. And I think if you can find a co-founder that you 100% trust, it just makes everything so much easier. There was never a time that I was like, oh, well, I wonder if he's doing, strategizing something behind my back and I don't know. It was never that never came into my mind. And I think that just, like Ankith said, there are already enough complex things you have to work through as co-founders and as leaders of like a super early stage company, and not having to worry about your co-founder is like one of the best things.
It sounds like both of your commitment to wanting to build something that was game-changing really also helped kind of expedite that trust and then help build that relationship right from the start.
Yeah, I think having those tough conversations and like coming out of them, it allows you to grow. And I think there are some co-founder relationships that explode. I think mainly because you aren't able to have those tough conversations with each other and then come out the other side. I think a lot of people will just say, well, founders in general are bad employees. I always say this because like you have to just be built differently to be an entrepreneur, and it just makes you a really, really bad normal employee. And I think part of that is the desire to be your own boss, the desire to like make the decisions that you think should be made for an organization. And inherently when you have a co-founder, it's just tougher to do. And yeah, I think being able to build up that trust really is a game changer versus just working with somebody that is equally as a hard worker or intense as you, but isn't willing to kind of come to the middle or in our end like totally flip opinions.
So is that what you would say, like kind of like being able to convince each other and then adopting each other's opinions? Is that what makes y'all's like disagreements work and like helps you work through those moments?
Yeah, I think it's both that. Then also I think that we also balance each other really well. Like I think so. As I'm sure we'll get to, Macro went through really probably 2 or 3 pivots to get to where we ended up. And I mean, pivoting is probably the hardest thing to do in a startup because it's in the mittens of what you've been doing today isn't working. And then it's like a realization that now you have to figure out something else. And initially it's like when you have a team, like the difficulty compounds because now you have this entire team that's working towards something that maybe you don't believe is like what the right thing is anymore. And it's when you tell them at what point is it when you have a new direction or not. But the first step of it, admittance, like being able to say to John, like, shit, I just don't think what we're doing is working, or like something in my gut is telling me like this is not like working out for us, we should think about something else. I think that when I say we balance each other really well, what I mean is I think that we both had those moments separately, and I think for whatever reason we played the role well of like when one person was like really feeling down about something, the other would actually like feel really up about something, and like it would just like naturally, and it wasn't kind of a force like, oh, John's feeling down, I need to like now feign some sort of positive attitude. It was, no, actually I saw the business in a different perspective, or John saw the business in a different perspective, and we ended up agreeing multiple times like, yeah, pivot was necessary, but like there was positive inklings around that. So I think it's a balance of like being realist but then also optimistic, because as a founder you need to be like, you're purely doing this because you believe you can create something net new that hasn't existed before, or like in a new way that hasn't come to fruition before, and that you have the skill set to be able to do so with your team. But then there's also moments of like the realism that will bring you down, and so having that balance in someone else, so it's not just like your internal debate within your own head, and you can actually voice your feelings to someone else, was like, and is like incredibly valuable. And I don't know if I could ever do that by myself and like have that own internal monologue of like that Disney man who's playing chess with himself. Like you need, at least for me, I need that partner to like do that with.
Yeah, it sounds like what you all have is like neither one of you was in a lull at the same time and about the same things. So it helped you kind of pick each other back up and work through those transitions?
I was going to say, and maybe this can kind of like segue us a little bit into more macro stuff, but I think a great example of that was in fundraising. We had decided that, hey, we really want to close a seed round before we graduate. That way, we can really hit the ground running and start hiring a team and working without having to worry about fundraising, that summer. In retrospect, it was a great thing that we did because the pandemic hit like 2 months after we finished fundraising. So it ended up being great, but I remember vividly a moment when we were in San Francisco and we had just gone on like a multi-day road trip down to Sand Hill Road. Like we were in the city, we were just pitching everybody that would listen to us. And I think had COVID, but I was feeling extremely down. I felt like physically sick, mentally exhausted. I was just like totally done. And I would say that was the closest time that I came to giving up with the company. And it was at that time where I like let Ankith know that I was like, I was not in a great mood. I was very angry, and he was kind of that first calm and like he would just listen to me, which I think was hugely impactful. And then didn't just let me kind of like continue to wallow in my sadness. He like, I would say like somewhat forcefully started talking to me about, hey man, like this is what we signed up for. This is what we're trying to do. And we just have to keep going until it works. And I think it was situations like that where, it's a great example of somebody who, if they were by themselves or with a different co-founder that would have also been down at the same time, the company could have just been done. Like we would have just said, okay, well, we're not going to finish fundraising. We'll just shut down. We had a couple of people on the team at the time, but not a huge team, and probably go get some big tech jobs or something, which would have been, in retrospect, the worst possible decision we could have ever made. But it really takes somebody to come in and pull you up at those downtimes of the roller coaster. A good co-founder just does that.
And then you gave everyone COVID.
Exactly. No, it was, so this is wild, kind of getting into the macro story a bit. Like after we had kind of pivoted into a couple different ideas, we started fundraising in January of 2020. And I remember when we were going to First Mark Capital's office in New York City, who was one of our seed investors, it was the first time we had seen a sign that said no handshakes. And it was just wild because, now you think so many of these pitches are done over Zoom. It's super normal to have a remote pitch. But at the time, it was like we were literally going into conference rooms at all these investors' offices in New York City and San Francisco. And just that idea of, in the course of 2 months, we went from shaking hands to not shaking hands to being in, the video conferencing space with macro in the time when that is absolutely exploding.
Yeah, so actually perfect pivot into macro. I would love to kind of hear from you all. How did macro come to be, and how did you land on the ultimate product that was the product that got you all acquired?
Yeah, that is a lot of twists and turns there. So the very first thing we started with after the whole address changing kind of idea that brought us together was another kind of very business school problem, which was we didn't know how we should be spending our time. At business school, but also just more generally, like as kind of young adults, we didn't know like where should we be allocating time? Like how much time should be spent doing social things or alone time? Like should there be a structured amount of alone time that an adult has to reflect or meditate or just be by yourself? Because I actually really struggle with that. I'm someone who always just wants to be around other people. And then of all the things you could do with other people, there's so many events always happening, whether it's at school or in your city. And you never really knew, is that a good time, like a way to spend your time until afterwards. And then you could reflect and say, that was a waste of my time. That event was actually meaningful. So we had this idea of like rating your interactions and how you spend your time. And that was actually a really bad idea because like no one wanted to like rate every single way that they spent their time. But what we did pick up when we talked to people is like meetings, and we just latched onto this idea of meetings. And it was lovely because how you spend your personal time is like largely undocumented, unless you're like a business school type person that like puts their whole social calendar in an actual calendar. But your meetings, they're on a company calendar. So there's actual data and metadata around who you're meeting with, when you're meeting, how you're meeting, whether it's physically or in person. And we were like, well, what if we could just rate every single meeting? And that's where actually our first kind of company idea came from, which we called Marlo at the time, which was a Slack bot that you send in your Slack workspace, and it would sync into your Google Calendar, and it would message you and everyone else in that meeting and ask, hey, how'd this meeting go? You can rate it anonymously. And that was, the very first thing.
I can definitely empathize with that problem of having so many meetings. Okay, so I am known to run really efficient meetings. I actually very much pride myself on that. Every meeting has an agenda. We've got action items at the end. And it's crazy that there are so many meetings I've attended that don't have that, where they're kind of like, what's going on? I'm like, are you kidding me? You called this meeting, you tell me. Otherwise, I'm not staying.
Yeah, I think that was something that we heard so much from users that we interviewed early on, and obviously from our own early careers at the time. We had Ankith at GamerSensei and me at DoorDash. We'd just seen, as you continue to scale a company, you get more and more meetings, and especially more and more pointless meetings that are just there so that you can feel like you're working or something. And at least trying to rate those and show people that this one is a really good one or this one's a really bad one. We're hoping that we'd enact some change. And I think that's actually where we really started getting even more to our next pivot, where we turned into macro, was that we found that, the Marlo product where we were rating the meetings was really a diagnostic tool, and it wasn't a solution for people. And I think that's one thing you hear about the vitamin versus painkiller thing all the time, about, are you building something that's actually giving people the solution to the problem that they have, or just something to tell them that they have a problem? And what we found out very quickly was that, especially as more and more people were doing remote jobs and having remote meetings, they were struggling with airtime and feeling like they were heard in the meetings. People who were all in one office, you don't really have, maybe sometimes you do, but you don't have as much of this one person dominating conversation. Whereas virtually, it's easy for somebody to kind of disappear into the ether that is Zoom. And so we found that, hey, people feel like they're not being heard. Maybe we should build a solution, an actual tech solution for that. And so that was our first iteration of macro, which was literally just a video overlay, like a sidebar to Zoom, that was telling you who's speaking what percent for that meeting. And it's actually something that we then saw people change their behavior based off of, as opposed to just seeing, yes, of course, I know this meeting sucks, and now you're confirming that it does. And that really just changed the whole trajectory of the company down more of the like, hey, how can we actually help people make the changes that they want in the meetings that they're in?
So how did you all land on the final version of macro then, which is like the customization of the interface and being able to kind of show expression of yourself within Zoom?
Yeah, so that was like the third, I guess, micro pivot within the Zoom platform. So after we decided what John just talked about, which is, hey, we're going to go all in on Zoom and say we're going to modify the Zoom interface to show how much people were talking, we then actually started adding more productivity related features, right? Like now that we had what we ended up building, which even Zoom didn't know how we did, which was like a finagling of multiple different SDKs and APIs to create a third-party Zoom client. And what that means is we had our own standalone application that could join any Zoom meeting, even if everyone else on that meeting was on Zoom. So we had end control. And when that kind of opened the floodgates to a lot of user feedback, which is, oh, if you could do this in my meetings, that'd be amazing. If you could do X, Y, or Z. And note-taking came up a ton, because everyone who's good at meetings like yourself would take notes in those meetings and assign action items. But they would be flipping between multiple windows, their meeting window, if it was a virtual meeting, and then their note-taking window. And so we actually built within a video Zoom UI, essentially, a notepad that was like live syncing to a Google Doc. So as you typed in our UI, it automatically created a Google Doc in the background and was updating it live, and you could assign action items. You could mark every single note you took was an action item, an open-ended question, or just like general background context. And at that point, we actually had like a decision to make, which was we had airtime, which is this feature around like inclusivity and conversation dynamics. And we actually also experimented a little bit with other features around personalization and how do you make the UI yours versus these very productivity oriented features like notes and integrations and like what else could you add to make my meeting the most like hyper productive thing. And the two paths that Macro could have gone down were one, what we did, which was all about you as a person and how do you bring more of yourself into the meeting, or two, this like raw productivity log, right? Or like you actually have a bunch of integrations that hook right into your meetings. And we ended up choosing the first. That was actually a pretty long decision process. We went through multiple design sprints and just like really thinking about what type of company do we want to be. But at the end of the day, what we kept hearing from people is the productivity stuff was nice, but the core problem and this was again right as the pandemic was starting, people were like in 1 or 2 months of just all Zoom meetings, was like Zoom fatigue was coming out, and notes weren't solving the problem of Zoom fatigue. Like nothing productivity related was solving this idea of now my entire interaction with people is on this kind of 2D rectangular jail cell grid of Zoom. So we were like, well, no, let's solve that problem. And our thought at the solution was if you can help someone bring them more of themselves into the meeting. So you're adding depth, dimensionality, context of who they are, personalization to show off these things, very similar to like how video games allow you to customize your character. Now that's not just like a generic thing that you're like in a grid in a box, but the software, like kind of our thesis was the software that you use is a reflection of who you are. And meetings and video is so personal that you should have a very personal choice and not be using what is really the most generic video conferencing software, which is Zoom. And so, yeah, that is kind of the winding path of how we ended up at Macro.
That is super fascinating. So I told you all I have so many more questions about this stuff. Actually, I think I have like at least 5 more. But in interest of time of moving on to some investor stuff, I'm just going to jump ahead to the fundraising question of like, how did you all decide when to start fundraising, and how did that process go for you?
We raised a pre-seed and a seed. The pre-seed was almost totally preempted. So because we were on campus, we were meeting with a lot of different investors in Boston, and Underscore came to us, and Lily, the partner there, said, hey, we should just put together a pre-seed round, be able to hire a couple engineers and really accelerate the pace. I had been writing all of the code myself and trying to go to class and, pass, and that was getting a little tough. And so I think having that money was really, really helpful for us. And it really gave us more confidence in our ability to build the company. We were both first-time founders and we had no idea what this was going to look like. And so with that pre-seed money, we were able to go hire a few people, which then led to having to fire a few people, which neither of us had really had a lot of experience in. And so it was just a good learning experience while we were still kind of in that petri dish of school. And then the whole purpose of the timing for the seed round was we wanted to have that secured before graduation. And we knew that we were going to have some student debt. We are, I think, fairly adventurous and risk-taking, but I think, having no job or no paycheck post a couple $100,000 worth of school cost is kind of a scary endeavor. And so we said, let's completely de-risk anything that we were worried about. I think that's actually a good explanation of how we operated a lot of things. Was we would try to strategically find problems. What's the biggest problem that is facing this company when we were looking at pivoting or not? Like, this is the biggest existential risk is, are we going to be able to compete as a productivity tool? Are we going to be able to compete, as a Zoom add-on instead of like a competitor to Zoom? And I think facing those things like head-on has always been really good for us. So we said, biggest problem or biggest existential risk is we're going to run out of money or not have enough money to be able to make this thing sustainable or what we want it to be. And so we decided to go raise. And yeah, I think that, like I mentioned a little bit, there were definitely ups and downs, probably more downs in any fundraising round than ups. It's all worth it in the end, but it's really a shitty experience. And no, I don't know anybody that likes it. Maybe there are some people who just like fundraising and not actually build companies, but the two of us are builders at heart. So we really tried to make it as short of a process as possible. Like I said, we scheduled a ton of meetings in San Francisco, went out there in person, tried to meet with everybody we possibly could, did the same in New York, and really just tried to get commitments before like March. And we were able, I said, we started in January, we had the round closed in March. And so keeping that short, I think, was great for our sanities, and also I think pretty lucky timing wise in terms of the pandemic and everybody shutting down. What had been a pretty exciting seed market kind of slowed down and shut down after that point. So a little bit of luck and a lot of compressed timelines and hard work in that period of time. And you look at our product and you look at like the GitHub map of contributions, and basically nothing happened for those 2 months. And so we were just fully focused on that fundraise.
So let's jump all the way to the other side then. I'm curious, you all got acquired, which congratulations, is such a huge accomplishment. How did that go about?
Yeah, so we weren't really looking to sell at the moment, like that ended up happening. Throughout the process, like we had gotten a couple cold reach outs, and they weren't really anything, I guess, worth kind of exploring further. But one thing that we did have on our minds, which I think to John's point of being straightforward and having like the tough conversations, is we kind of saw a little bit of the writing on the wall with Zoom. We had built our entire company on top of them, and we know platform risk was like the biggest question we would get from the VCs, but it manifested itself in a very different way than we expected, which was Zoom was actually incredibly supportive of us. They were extremely easy to work with. They were super friendly. They had just launched their Zoom Apps Fund, and they were like eager to kind of participate in our next funding round. However, the pace of the development of the Zoom SDKs was like starting to, like we were kind of already on the fringes of what we were able to do, just tying things together. And they're a very new platform, still in its infancy really compared to any other kind of developer platform. And also like security restrictions, like Zoom had gone through the Zoom bombing scandal, if scandal is the right word for that, right? And so they were starting to put a lot of emphasis on security. And for us in our product, like we were very much a bottoms-up motion-driven company where macro is a personal choice, and any employee at any company could choose to use macro. And then people would see them using macro, and it would kind of grow by word of mouth. And that's how we were growing. But we saw a couple of changes coming down the security pipeline, which potentially meant that an IT admin would have to approve macro for the entire company before even one person could try it out. And that really kind of changes the entire business model, because it wasn't meant to be an enterprise or top-down sale, because it wasn't for everyone. And I think that's also the downside of building really opinionated software. And that's exactly what we were building. Is we were trying to build the opposite of a generic kind of for everyone software. And so that was in our back of minds of like, how do we kind of decouple off of Zoom? Not fully, because we still believe that the right way to be successful in the audio video space is to not take on people who have insane distribution and who are amazing at audio video like Zoom. But we couldn't build our whole company after them. And around that time, actually, we were connected with Phil. We had spoken to him a year prior when he kind of first launched in beta, but Phil had built something and launched and it was very similar to macro in that it worked really well with Zoom, but it was a different approach. There's a camera input and a camera feed modifier as opposed to kind of a client. And right around that time, kind of Phil had raised Series B. And in that actually was like a line I remember in their kind of TechCrunch article saying like they wanted to build a standalone Zoom client. So the next time we connected, I asked Phil like, hey, we saw this in the article. What are you guys doing on the Zoom front? Honestly, to say like, hey, are they going to become a competitor of ours or not? And Phil, he's kind of very outspoken, and you can read like listen to his interviews, podcasts. He's just a very honest person. He's like, yep, we want to do it. We have no team or any expertise of how to do it. And the conversation kind of just shifted to like, do we want to do this together? And I think that for us, that was a really compelling opportunity, because when you look at like a lot of companies, like if you're looking to get your team acquired, like that's going to be valuable to almost anybody. Like you have talented engineers and designers and developers, like anyone will find value in that. But I think there's now the subset of all those companies is extremely small when we're looking at who's actually going to find our technology valuable, because we had built our entire technology on Zoom. And so it's really people who want to play well with Zoom. And that pool was smaller. So we didn't actually even run a process or hire a banker or any of that. We were just like, we know this company, we share a co-investor, we like their strategy in terms of like the synchronous stuff that they're doing, the asynchronous stuff that they're doing, and their approach to playing well with Zoom, but not being fully dependent on a platform and having kind of an independent audio video stack as well. And we just started kind of negotiating. And again, that process was really quick. I think we were kind of all on the same page of what we thought was fair for how much and how hard we were working, how to make our investors happy with the deal. Given that it's not going to be this kind of knock it out of the park exit. We'd only been operating for like a year and a half after our seed round. And yeah, it kind of just all came together within 2.5 months or something like that. It was very quick.
Really, really amazing journey for you all though, because essentially I think when I was looking at the stats, right, it's like you all founded Macro in like 2018 and then essentially got acquired beginning of 2021. So what you were able to build and then the value you were able to create for the consumer, and then finding a really compatible partner that understood your vision and really complemented that vision is just really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's fairly rare for that to happen. Yeah, I think it was honestly and vibing with the founder. I mean, vibing with Phil, I think, and hearing his opinions just in general on remote work, his opinions on how you can prioritize in-person time, virtual synchronous meetings, asynchronous meetings, kind of the full stack of communication. I think it was super interesting to us. And, we only had that synchronous video chunk. That was the only thing that we focused on. And that was the other thing too. We knew there was going to be some consolidation in this market. It's inevitable. And I think there will still be more. I think you see a lot more acquisitions happening even now in this market with kind of the video space. But we said if we can have somebody who's SoftBank backed and has a big war chest to go through, what we knew was going to be a long multi-year struggle to own video, like it could be better to join them rather than to try to fight them. I think it's, the thing that Ankith was saying about like being just real with each other and just having that realistic mindset on, as a founder, you have to be a little bit unrealistic and think everything is going to be great and you're going to hit one out of the park. But I think at this point, we still had a ton of money in the bank. Like we mentioned earlier, we're super lean. We didn't have to do this, but just kind of looking forward and thinking about, hey, is this something that we really see a path forward, or should we take this opportunity? I think that was where the co-founder relationship and the ability to communicate really helped the two of us, where we could say, hey, this is probably something we should do. And now let's focus on getting the best deal that we possibly can, and making sure the team gets a great deal too.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And we will pivot to investor stuff. Through your success, you've also invested in 30 plus companies. I found your website and I counted them. And I was just curious, like how did you all get started as investors?
Yeah, I think the very first investment, I remember I was actually like walking with Lily in downtown Boston, and John like calls me just after our meeting ended, and he's like, hey, I think like some of the DoorDash alumni are investing in this company, Clearbank at the time it was called, now it's called Clearco, and like we have the opportunity to join. And I had never done any angel investing. I had no idea kind of how AngelList syndicates worked or anything like that, and I was like, this sounds like a cool opportunity. We like looked at the company, looked at the deck. It was like growth stage, I think Series C or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm down, let's do it. And that's kind of how it all started. And I think the early phase was predominantly like AngelList and like what are the communities that we're a part of there, because we didn't really have any deal flow. And also we at that time, like didn't have cash to invest either, because we were like still founders and hadn't paid ourselves salary in so long. So it was really just like, let's look at what's available and like kind of pick and choose what we think is really cool. And they ended up being more later stage companies, I think, because when you're not meeting the founder, and this was also a learning because we made plenty of not justifiable investments on AngelList, but when you're at the early stage, you're really betting on the founding team. Like we know that because that's what we were convincing people of. Like, hey, you're investing in John and I, whether it's Marlo or Macro or which iteration of Macro, like we're gonna figure it out. with AngelList, like you don't really get any opportunity to meet the founders. Like maybe you can message them and maybe they'll get on the phone with you. But if you're like a small check, like it makes sense. They have higher priorities. They have to go find leads and bigger checks and herd all the cats. But growth stage companies are, I think, a little bit easier on AngelList because now the bet is more on the company and its execution, and you can see the track record of execution for years and years. And it's less on the idea and the team because they've been executing on it. Yeah, that's kind of how it started.
I was just going to say that the kind of the second phase of our investing life was post-acquisition, when all of a sudden we have some liquidity. And I think the way that we thought about it was, let's just try to get in as many different things as we can to try to learn as much as possible, because we, outside of a couple of AngelList deals and a couple of our friends from business school, we hadn't really dove into the investing world that much because we were founders and we didn't have time, frankly, to pay attention to doing that. And so that's when we started doing, we got into a couple venture funds as LPs. We started putting bigger checks into early stage founders that we were personally close with and super excited about and actually could meet and do more due diligence and actually get that feeling of knowing what they're doing. And then, also doing things like real estate investing and investing outside. So we just kind of did the breadth. We had no focus on like one specific area because we just wanted to learn. And I think that was really helpful, especially with like a crazy bull market that we had for the last couple of years until this past year. It was good to kind of see like, hey, this area, it's super risky and, it's not as fun. And this area, we really value a lot more. And so I think the only thing that I will suggest for people getting into it is, don't feel bad if you have a bunch of things that have failed in your investing journey, because I think it's just a standard. That's the norm, and it really helps you kind of learn and get to the point where you can say, okay, now I know kind of what my thesis is, or now I know what I really want to focus on in the future investing wise.
So actually perfect tie-in then to the next question, like what does success look like as an investor to you all?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that there's like monetary success. Like, does this investment pay back more than I invested in, right? And like, any more is a win, and any less is a zero, basically. But I think that really it's what John talked about is like the learnings of like, okay, I made this investment, regardless of how I did. Like, what did I learn? Like, when I diligenced this, whether there was a ton of diligence involved or whether it was like a FOMO check that was thrown into like, oh, these people are investing. Like we got to be in this at least for the story. Was it an accurate method of diligencing it? Was it a good call to make? And I mean, we've only had really 2 or 3 investments that have kind of gone to something, either return money or go to zero. And so it's very, very limited right now. And I think the time scale of investing is so long, which is also really daunting because you don't really know if you're a good investor for like 5+ years. Like you have no idea really. So yeah, I think it's like, what can you learn about how you're diligencing, how other people are diligencing, and trying to see like, how can I keep making better decisions, and is listening to my gut, which is mostly what it comes down to. Is that a strong signal? Is it leading to success or failure?
You all were founders, you were operators, now you're investors. How has your previous experience shaped how you invest now?
That is a great question. I feel like we have a good BS detector for founders. I think that there are things you say when you're fundraising that, aren't, I don't know how to, what's the right word to describe these, but they're like, they're more stories than realities, right? You're trying to pitch a dream. And I think that was something that, even as both of us, like we're inherently builders, we are product people, we're not salespeople. We know, hey, this is a cool product. This is something that I think would bring a bunch of benefit to people, but we had to like take some training on how can we actually pitch this super pie in the sky vision. And I think there's a difference between like pie in the sky vision based in reality and pie in the sky vision based on vaporware. And I think that's something that as founders, we can suss out pretty quickly. Like, okay, let me see the demo of the product. Describe to me like what you're building in real terms now. How are you going to like test hypothesis you have without it being like a Twitter campaign and a wait list? Like what are the actual foundational elements you have in this company? And I think that's something that we can glean pretty quickly in a call. Like if we got on a phone call with the founder, I think we can tell that within the first 10 minutes essentially. And then you can kind of unlock okay, we either pass immediately or we start diving into more of the due diligence.
So what are you all looking for when you invest in a company?
I mean, I think the first thing that John and I are like super aligned on is like, it gotta be a company that's interesting to us. It can't just be like, oh, this company's crushing it, but like, I have no idea what the product does, or like, I would like, it can't be something that's boring. I think at the end of the day, I think we want to invest in companies that we find like genuinely exciting, either from a consumer standpoint of like, hey, we would use this, from a founder standpoint of like, I wish this existed when they're trying to build macro because it would have made our lives easier in X, Y, or Z way, or just like, that is a type of company that I want to succeed because it creates a future that I want to see. And if it doesn't really fit into any of those, then I think regardless of, yes, this looks like a home run, or it's like, it looks like it's like rounding third about to go home, let's put in a little bit of money and maybe double or triple it in like a year. I don't know. Those bets are never worth it. And that's also, I think, why it makes it okay to take a loss, because like I invested in something that I really thought was going to be cool. And if it goes to zero, I think that's okay, because I liked what it was trying to do. And it wasn't just for like, it needs to make money.
I think it's the fun thing about angel investing versus investing out of a fund, just investing other people's money. Like if we were investing other people's money, then obviously now you have like a fiduciary duty to the LPs to like invest in what you think the best possible company outcomes will be. And then you start investing in B2B SaaS and like a bunch of boring infrastructure level stuff, which we just don't find fascinating. And we don't have to answer to anybody because it's our money. So we can just only invest in the things that are fun. Kind of tying that into like what's success for us. I think success is genuinely like, are we having fun and are we learning? And if we have friends that are raising money, can we like help out our friends? And I think if you just are very realistic with yourself, that like that is the goal of angel investing, not trying to make millions and millions of dollars, then I think you'll be a lot more successful, a lot more satisfied with it. If it's, I'm going to do this because I'm a genius investor and I'm going to go make millions, then I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment. So at least in my mind, and maybe in the future, like one or both of us will be professional investors, who knows? But I think in the short term, like it's just much more fun to play with your own money.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why I'm getting started, is because I am just so curious about other companies. I want to speak to founders. I want to hear their stories, such as yours. Like, it's so fun for me. I have so much energy when I talk to these people and when I learn from them. And I feel like every conversation is so eye-opening. And yeah, it's just been a really cool experience to be part of it.
Yeah, and especially if you were a founder and then all of a sudden you find yourself acquired and aren't a founder anymore, it's also great to stay close to other founders. It's like, it fills that desire to stay kind of in that early stage world by proxy through these investments.
So have you had any exits? So any like monetary successes or any kind of companies that have gone bust? I think, Ankith, you talked about FOMO investments at one point. Any stories?
I mean, yes, we have had both exits and companies that have gone bust. From like a FOMO investment standpoint, like I still feel good about our FOMO investments. Like I think, I don't know, we had an opportunity, and this is maybe not really angel investing, but we had an opportunity to buy Epic Games secondary, and both John and I were like, yes, like we're buying Epic Games secondary. We don't really care what the price is. Like it's just like a cool company that's building like this awesome like world and environment where kids are just like enjoying themselves, and that's like, and being both gamers, like we're just like, yeah, we wanna have a piece of this, and whether it's underwater or eventually we'll go up. Like it's FOMO, I think, just because like it's a private company that we have no business being investors in, and we're not adding any value to that company, but we just wanted to be part of it. And yeah, we've had a couple of companies that have gone to zero. One, maybe not a couple, but like Airlift was one where actually we thought like the company was great. Like they were a later stage company. Airlift is like the Pakistani DoorDash essentially. Like they just did a ton of like last mile delivery logistics in Pakistan, and like they were growing tremendously, and kind of out of nowhere they just shut down operations and like ceased to exist. And I think it had just raised around, I think, $50 to plus $million, and they just didn't have the cash to fund operations because it's a super cash intensive business. And I think that was this case of like, hey, this company sounds really cool. Like the Southeast Asian market is massive. They clearly have some traction, but did we really know how that business worked? Like, no, because I still don't understand why it shut down, or like how it burned through that much cash so quickly. So I think that's also a learning of like, no matter how cool something sounds, like if I can't explain how that business makes its money, or like how it works really simply, then I'm probably not smart enough to be invested in it. Which I guess is a lens that we selectively apply when we look at angel investments.
But I think now, I mean, that was probably one of our earliest investments that we had made too. It was when we had kind of started on that learning curve. And now I think a lot of the ones that we're putting more concentrated bets into are, people that we know or have been able to talk to that are raising, seeds or Series A's. And I think we'll just not know if that was successful for another 5+ years probably. The only exits that we've had have been through acquisitions, so it's nothing that, because we try to invest early stage, and obviously the IPO market has completely shriveled up in the last year. There just hasn't been a lot of other opportunities yet. I think it's just a matter of time.
For someone starting out as an angel investor, what's like one piece of advice you all would give them?
I think like go with your direct network first. Like I think I heard it explained one way, which is like build an index of your friends. So like index investing is like the safest way to quote unquote invest, right? Because you kind of get a mix of everything. And so if your friends that you like, presumably you believe in them because they're your friends and you've like known them for some period of time, they're building something cool and you have the opportunity and you're also in the financial position to be able to do so. Like build an index of your friends because you're supporting them. I think that they're obviously going to value that a ton, but then by building an index of like just investing in all your direct network, you kind of like basically like you're doubling down on yourself because you have chosen them as friends and you've chosen that network. I think when you start to go outside and it's like really not your network, which AngelList is not your network, AngelList syndicates aren't your network. They're really kind of just like those syndicates will really accept pretty much anybody. And the syndicate leads just have like a very different incentive structure than the actual investors. That's not your network, and you're now kind of it's very FOMO driven investing, which again I think any investor will tell you, and we've learned since like that's not a great way to invest. So yeah, I think start with your direct network. There will always be opportunities there with people you really know and you really trust, and you know that when it's with your friends, like they're going to obviously do everything they can to make that return something. And if it doesn't work out at the end of the day, which in most cases it won't, it's like it's with someone you had trusted more than a stranger that you had just given that same money to.
I think I would say just think of it as a donation. I think to tie into the friend aspect, there were multiple people on our cap table who just really believed in us, angels, and put in money. And we were super scared when we decided to sell the company that like, they're not getting a big return. Like, are they going to be mad at us? And literally 0 angels that we have were mad. They were all like, oh, great. Okay. Like, I'm super happy that you guys came to something that you were really excited about. And now, have said, okay, what's the next thing? Like, what are you going to start next that we can invest in again? And I think if you have that mentality that, oh, I'm using this to make a bunch of money, then I think you, one, will be just a worse angel investor. Like, people won't want you on the cap table if all you're worried about is, give me your financial forecast so I can make sure that you're running your business correctly. And if you instead think of that as like, hey, I'm going to help you as much as possible. And part of that help is just me giving you this money. And in the future, at some point, you maybe give me some back. But if not, like I was able to help you in some way. I just look at it more that way. And I think if you think about it that way in terms of capital allocation, it's good too, because, unless you're super, super independently wealthy, you probably shouldn't spend, a vast majority of your money angel investing. There are some people who would do that. If you're doing that, you might as well just probably start your own fund and just invest a ton of your own money in addition to other people's and make it professionalized. But, you should be investing majority of your money into equities or real estate, real assets and things that aren't like insanely risky like this. And so if you think about it as like a donation budget, I think it's just a nicer way to frame it and set your expectations up correctly.
Yeah, that's really helpful. The first video I did, which launched today, is all about the fact that your mindset should be that you lose all your money. Basically, that you'll just never see it again.
Yeah, zero expectation. And then if anything happens, then it's like only positive. It can't go lower. They can't take more money from you that you didn't give them.
The one exit that was like I can think of right now is it was like, I mean, hundreds of dollars or something that we made. It was like so tiny, essentially like exactly what we basically got our money back, plus a little bit. And it was so small, but just being like, seeing that check come through and be like, oh, that's cool. Like we just wouldn't have thought that like we made a couple $100 on this investment deal that we made randomly one day. So I think having that excitement is like also really nice. I can't imagine like if you invested in Uber and then all of a sudden it turns into $20 million, like that has to just be an insane feeling. But I think there's also a real element of luck in that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're gonna do, we've got a few sections left, but we'll try to breeze through these. And I found a name for this thanks to my friend who is a master punner. I don't know if that's a word, but it's called deal tales, like details. So wanted to dive deep into a deal where you can share some of the details. And first, like one company that you, maybe it was your first, maybe it was your last, maybe it was the one that you were most excited about. Tell me, like, how did you find out about them? How did you do due diligence? Anything you negotiated? And kind of what's your involvement been with them ever since?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the company that comes like kind of immediately to mind is a company called Tango. So it's tango.us. And they are basically like a magical workflow capture tool. So what they do is they have a Chrome extension and a desktop app, and as a like knowledge worker, when you enable the Chrome extension, you can it'll automatically capture the steps that you're taking. You take screenshots and then assemble them into like a beautiful workflow for you to share. So documentation, processes, onboarding, etc. Tango, we actually knew through a lot of different ways, but so Ken, their CEO, was actually a college friend of mine. He was my fraternity president. Had gone to work at Uber post-college, obviously did really, really well, and then came to HBS, and he was a year younger than John and I. And his two co-founders, Dan and Brian, Dan actually worked in VC before HBS, and Dan actually made two intros to General Catalyst and FirstMark, who both ended up investing in our seed round of Macro. So in a way, we were always going to invest in Tango if we had the opportunity, because like Dan kept us raise our seed round anyways. But the product that they created, like I remember John and I would talk to them at HBS, like around like the like lunch table or whatever, around they were thinking about like employee onboarding experience. How do you make that better? And we just seen through the earliest days like them iterating, and then the pandemic hit. They had a full year. Like we had 3 months left of school. They had a year and 3 months left of school, and they dropped out. They had that much conviction in their idea. And I think that just alone shows like what John and I talked about really early on, of like commitment and like the desire to like manifest this thing. Like dropping out of school, something that John and I never did, because we kind of were able to manage it, but they were just like, no, we want to go all in on this business right now. We have the momentum. Like that's another huge sign of commitment. And then they raised a seed from Wing. They raised their Series A recently from Tiger Global. And yeah, we were honestly just super fortunate enough to be able to participate and just like watch them grow and be along for the ride.
Yeah, I think founders. Like that is the number one thing that all the deals we're most excited about. That's why. I mean, the business is really fascinating, and we had been in obviously the productivity space, but knowing those guys and knowing that they were going to be successful and that we wanted to back them was the number one thing. I think in terms of like a hot deal, I would say it was still a very hot Series A. There's really no room for negotiation at all from an angel perspective. Like the deal terms were set. I think trying to over negotiate, maybe you can do that on a seed stage and you're putting in a good chunk of change, but I think the worst possible scenario could be like, oh, we're putting in a 20K check and we're trying to dictate all these things to you. Sorry, but I'm just not going to take your money if you're doing that at the early stage. And then diligence wise, I think, seeing a lot of their metrics, they had already built a product, and we had seen, you could see on the Chrome store, like how many installs they're getting on their extension, just looking at the product. And again, I think we just default to how polished and how effective is this product, because we're both product people. And once you see something that looks awesome and it's something that you enjoy using, then it's easy to diligence in my mind. Also, I want to do one quick other pitch. This was a different way of getting into angel investing. There was a company kind of similar to Tango that was building during HBS called Goldcast. And an interesting way that you can get into angel investing without putting in your money is some venture capital firms will actually allow you to do kind of like scouting, or if you source a deal for them, they'll give you some of that carry for that deal. Underscore is one that does that. And so I think, if you're watching this and you're trying to get into angel investing, but you don't have a bunch of capital that you can risk and donate, like I was saying earlier, try to talk to some of these VCs and see if, hey, if I start giving you deal flow, will you throw me a bone? And that's exactly what happened with this Goldcast team. I introed them to Underscore, and then they just raised a big Series A as well. So there's other ways to get into it rather than just risking your own money.
That is definitely helpful advice, given that you're making donations.
Yeah, exactly. have other LPs like pension funds do the donations for you, and then just benefit from them if they're successful.
So the next section is Never Again, which is just kind of talking about failures. I think we have this culture of failure is great, blah, blah, but then we actually, if someone does fail, it's kind of like a bad thing for real. And so I kind of want to normalize a time that we failed, and I fail all the time. You could ask me what I failed at today. I'll think of something. And so in this section, I'm curious, what's a time that you all failed where you're wow, that was kind of a mess up. And then how did you recover from that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that with each of our pivots, we ended up pivoting, but the decision to sell is also kind of like a pivot decision, right? You're not going to work on the company anymore. I think that realistically, we could have made all of those decisions a lot earlier, and then we actually did. And I think part of it is you don't want to admit something's wrong until you're kind of forced to deal with something being wrong. And at the end of the day, I think both John and I had the feeling in our gut of either this direction's not working, this thing is not panning out, or this company is not working, or it may not, it's working now, but we don't see the path to becoming a huge company doing what we're currently doing. And I think even though we went through it 4 times basically in this really short 3.5 year period, each of those times, I don't think we necessarily learned from the prior time and just had the conversation earlier of just shit, this is, I don't feel comfortable still building 100% on Zoom, or I don't feel comfortable trying to keep building, thinking about building all these productivity extensions when it's who's going to maintain all those things. So I think this is tough because like John said, you have to be unrealistic as a founder. You have to think that things will work out. So finding the balance of I'm being unrealistically optimistic, but then also recognizing how I feel and say if this is nagging me right now and keeping me up at night, it's not, that feeling's never going to go away until I do something that addresses it. And there's also the kind of the cliche quote, which is sales solves all problems, which is probably very true. We never got to that stage at Macro. We were always a free product, and we had a lot good amount of usage, but I think that could change things too. But I think even then, it doesn't solve everything. If you feel something's not working in your business, then you know it better than anyone else, better than your investors, better than even you. You might even want to admit it, but just coming to terms with what you probably already know. I
think people problems fit into that really well. If somebody is not working out, and if you have a team of 7 people, it's really tough to lose a 7th of that team. And so you just fail to make the change and just let it linger for longer and longer. And obviously that hurts company culture and makes everybody else feel down too. So I would say that like, I feel like some of the biggest failures were in hiring and then not reverting that decision, to use a euphemism, quick enough.
I can definitely relate to that one as well, as someone who's built a team and has had to make many transitions. All right, so we are wrapping up. I have a rapid round for you all, which I did not share with you. So just share the first thing that comes to mind. We'll just go through it real quick. Mountain or ocean?
Mountain.
Boston winter or Austin summer?
Oh. I'm going to say Austin summer.
I might go Boston winter. I mean, that's like, they're both brutal. They're just both brutal.
Okay, yeah, no, they are. Pre-seed or hemp seed?
Wait, sorry, pre-seed or hemp seed? Hemp seed.
Pre-seed.
Okay, nice. And I know you two are Formula One fans. So Lewis Hamilton or Max, I don't know how to say his last name, Verstappen?
Yeah, Hamilton, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to not like Max. I mean, Lewis is the greatest of all time. So.
Cool, that wraps up our talk today. Now really it's just about like, where can people find you? Any recommendations, final recommendations you have, Twitter handles you want to share, parting words for the people.
Yeah, well, so we invest together, Ankith and I. And so if you go to gtrkst.com, that is our holding company that we invest out of. It stands for something, and maybe we'll reveal that one day. But for now, it'll stay secret. And yeah, I mean, I am not a huge Twitter guy, but Ankith has a good following, so I'll let him plug his Twitter.
The following is dwindling. I think I'm happy to give the email to people, so we can give you our emails and then we can put them in the description or something. We're super happy to just chat with, like John said, when we're not founders anymore, we always want to stay in touch and close to that founder early stage scene. I think it gives us a lot of life instead of just kind of being bigger tech employees. So yeah, we'd love to kind of hear from anybody if they're working at a company, thinking of an idea, or looking to get into angel investing. You can hopefully learn from our mistakes.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for your time. I continue to learn from you, which I really appreciate. And you all have such fascinating journeys and stories. I'm so excited to kind of see where you all go next.
Yeah, we really enjoyed this. This was super nice.
I started this channel to have an excuse to talk to people that are more interesting and smarter than me, and today was definitely one of those scenarios. I'm so glad that I got to talk to Ankith and John. If you're wondering, Martina, where are you? What is this background? It's because I'm at my mom's house right now and my sister painted this painting. I release videos every Tuesday. Come learn alongside me. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with a friend.